At 4:32 in the morning within Chicago, Illinois, 112 public servants implicated a reigning governor, while 3.4 tons of illicit substances were confiscated alongside 410 Illinois in wash funds. This operation was far more than a narcotics sweep. It represented a complete political infiltration. A cartel supply chain had embedded itself directly within state governance. Allow me to demonstrate just how extensive this corruption runs. It was 5:41 a.m. in Chicago, Illinois, and the metropolis remained mostly dormant as the federal procession navigated the administrative quarter. There were no wailing sirens or strobing lights, only the quiet drone of motors slicing through the frigid dawn atmosphere. Ice crystals frosted the stationary vehicles, and the windows of office buildings remained completely unlit. Not a single sign indicated that history was on the verge of shattering. The objective was neither a storage facility nor a boundary checkpoint, but rather the Chicago Executive Office belonging to Governor Hassan Abdir Rahman Noor. He was the Somali-born figurehead acclaimed for his rapid ascent within the American political landscape. At precisely 5:41, a fortified entryway surrendered in mere moments. Operatives advanced swiftly and soundlessly, with their firearms lowered, yet fully prepared for engagement. The interior appeared remarkably mundane, featuring gleaming workstations and hung portraits, while the Illinois banner stood next to the American standard. Symbols representing public faith were present in every corner. Suddenly, the facade of legitimacy completely disintegrated. Behind a secured administrative locker, agents discovered 9.5 kilograms of cocaine packaged and labeled within a financial archive vault. Fentanyl blocks were encased in clinical wrappings retrieved from a hidden recess beneath the flooring. Weapons and digitally locked hard drives were also seized from the premises. This event was not an external assault against the establishment. It was authority itself compromised from the inside. If you are still viewing this content, please comment "breach" so I understand you are tracking the reality. What the detectives revealed was significantly more chilling than simple intimidation. Governor Hassan Abdul Rahman Noor and his spouse functioned without haste, without hysteria, and without errors. This was not criminality born out of desperation. Behind the official dresses and the formal pleasantries existed a secondary apparatus. This shadow organization did not initially depend on brutality. It depended on documentation spreadsheets and scheduling planners alongside the silent power of bureaucratic seals. Judgments were never hurried and distribution paths were evaluated like scientific trials. If a transport failed, it was recorded, calibrated, and relaunched weeks afterward using an alternate route. Capital did not pour in vigilantly. It circulated. Over 7 years, examiners tracked over $214 million, moving through a web of phantom corporations crafted to appear benevolent. Medical and administrative centers that never unlocked their doors, and community initiatives that never materialized served as fronts. Emergency subsidies quietly transformed into operational liquidity. Every transaction bore a reputable designation. Every single one passed through palms, disciplined to never question the source. Yet the most unsettling revelation was not monetary in nature. Internal messages displayed conversations regarding residential zones, the way commanders discuss battlefields. Districts were categorized by hazard levels, not to safeguard inhabitants, but to determine where aggression could be absorbed without scrutiny. When shootings escalated, the supply lines were not closed. They were fortified. When adverse drug reactions surged, the deliveries were modified rather than decreased. Human lives were regarded as calculated casualties. The governor's spouse managed the most effective stratum. Her web transformed public health systems into logistical barriers. Medical licenses became keys for entry, while patient files turned into camouflage. Appropriations intended to sustain the elderly were diverted to keep smuggling lanes active. This was not avarice spiraling out of command. It was regimentation stripped of morality. They did not require coercion, nor did they require anarchy. They relied on the establishment to shield them because they had constructed it to perform that specific function. Once that reality was exposed, the inquiry ceased being about graft and became about damage control. If you have ever relied on the system without skepticism, share this footage because someone you know requires this information. At 3:58 a.m., the directive was issued without theatrics, consisting of a single word: execute Across Illinois, mobile devices buzzed simultaneously. Charts that had resided on operations room walls for weeks transformed from strategy aids into active mandates. Red sectors, blue vectors, and circles marked around locations that appeared benign to civilians were activated. Clinics, storage depots, recreation centers, and quiet residential houses were all targets. The conflict initiated before the sun crested the horizon. Expressways exiting Chicago were blockaded in total silence. State troopers maneuvered concrete barricades into position while tactical squads glided down frozen side avenues. Above the skyline, drones ascended and spread outward with their optics penetrating rooftops, garages, and tree lines. A rotary aircraft loitered at low altitude over the manufacturing district, with its blades dispersing powder snow across vacant loading platforms. The initial breach struck a former medical logistics warehouse on the south side. The structure appeared derelict, with corroded lettering and shattered panes. However, when the entryway blasted inward, operatives entered a manufacturing plant of demise. Industrial stampers, chemical drums, and vacuum sealing units were found already running hot. 72 kilograms of narcotics rested in packaging, ready for instant shipment. 2 individuals fled, but a canine unit intercepted them in under 8 seconds. 20 minutes later, gunfire erupted in a residential enclave near Cicero. A garage portal burst open, and 3 armed figures sprinted into the gloom weaving between properties. A drone established a lock projecting a white targeting reticle over the lead sprinter. He was unaware that he had already been encircled. Snow sprayed upward as agents converged from both flanks. One subject fell, while the other 2 were taken down forcefully and restrained in a yard still adorned with toddler playthings. By 4:40 a.m., the offensive was omnipresent. A modified church cellar exposed tablet presses and currency counting machines beneath colored glass windows. A nonprofit bureau contained nothing but vacant tables until a hidden trapdoor opened to reveal long guns swathed in prayer mats. At a riverside dock, agents seized a lorry mere minutes from departure. Its cargo list claimed medical relief provisions, but inside fentanyl blocks were piled like encyclopedias. Defiance ignited in isolated pockets not as mayhem, but as panic. Shots were discharged, doors were slammed, and engines revved only to fail under tire deflation devices. In one suburban incursion, a suspect barricaded himself within a townhouse. Dialogue failed, and the entry lasted only 12 seconds. When dawn finally illuminated, Chicago 41 sites had been neutralized. The statistics were overwhelming. Over 3,000 kilograms of illicit substances, $187 million in currency bullion, and crypto assets were secured. 46 weapon stockpiles were found, and more than 120 individuals were detained before midday. To the general populace, it appeared instantaneous. To the agents maneuvering through smoke precipitation and breached entryways, it was the discharge of months of tension. This was no longer a simple probe. It was a purge, and it was merely the midpoint of the saga. If you desire the complete narrative rather than headlines or apologies, subscribe immediately. The subsequent chapters explore even further depths. What surfaced next was not recorded in transport logs or bank transfers. It was recorded in human beings. As detectives began cross-referencing detention files, immigration documents, and street-level reconnaissance, a secondary hierarchy emerged beneath the drug ring. It was quieter, darker, and significantly more disruptive. Narcotics represented only one half of the enterprise. The other component was personnel. Over a 4-year duration, more than 600 mails had been channeled into Illinois through conduits linked directly to the governor's inner sanctum. They did not arrive as family units, nor did they traverse standard resettlement procedures. They arrived individually staggered and officially undocumented, yet administratively shielded. Their dossiers narrated a history no media statement ever mentioned. Previous detentions in other jurisdictions, gang alliances erased from databases, and combat wounds that did not correspond to any Allied military campaigns were common. Some had been flagged years prior, only to have those warnings quietly expunged. They were not imported to assimilate, they were imported to function. Investigators charted the consequences of their arrival. Within 18 months, communities along specific avenues witnessed trends that could not be disregarded as chance. 73 shootings, 109 aggravated robberies, and 31 human trafficking incidents were recorded. Each event led back not to arbitrary aggression, but to clusters of subjects linked by the exact same intake routes. The brutality was not chaotic. It was utilized. Internal correspondence unveiled the rationale. These men were deployed to police turf, frighten local opposition, and lock down distribution sectors that narcotics alone could not defend. When police pressure surged in one precinct, operations migrated, not because the network was retreating, but because it was relocating resources. The most terrifying aspect involved public financing. Several of the men possessed identification issued by healthcare vendors associated with the governor's spouse. They displayed badges, accessed facilities, and moved without restriction through institutions intended to assist the elderly and impaired. Medicaid billing archives later demonstrated millions of dollars in falsified services. Reimbursements were disbursed for treatments that never occurred. That capital did not disappear. It funded armaments transport and confidentiality. In one verified instance, a shooting outside a market left 2 senior citizens injured. The gunman was later recognized as a man whose caregiver agency had billed the state $1.9 million in under a year. Money intended to keep fragile citizens alive had been transmuted into munitions. This was no longer organized crime in the conventional definition. It was population engineering. Entire housing blocks became tactical staging grounds. Community hubs became rendezvous locations. Anxiety propagated unevenly clustering in areas least prepared to withstand it. Inhabitants learned which avenues to shun, which times to remain indoors, and which inquiries to suppress. By the time analysts concluded assembling the chronology, one deduction was inescapable. The network did not simply endure violence, it necessitated it. Aggression generated disorder, and disorder generated concealment. Under that concealment, the apparatus continued to operate. The dossier had commenced with narcotics in an office, but now it concerned something far more perilous. Drugs were merely half the narrative. People were the remainder. If this alters how you perceive public security, comment truth below. As the detentions increased, investigators recognized the network did not persist on intimidation alone. It persisted on collaboration. Quiet, calculated collaboration was embedded deep within institutions that citizens relied upon daily. This was not a cartel buying off bureaucrats individually. It was a system enlisting itself. Documents confiscated during the incursions exposed a cadence that was predictable and almost sophisticated. Zoning sanctions materialized days before storage facilities changed ownership. Health licenses were approved hours before new clinics launched. These clinics never examined patients, yet received deliveries. Traffic policing along specific freight corridors decreased significantly the same week new transport waivers were ratified. Nothing intersected by happenstance. A county law enforcement commander sanctioned temporary access passes permitting uninspected freight through restricted zones. A procurement administrator approved bulk hardware acquisitions that never arrived. A municipal planning council conducted sessions lasting under 15 minutes, during which multiple lots were rezoned without debate. Every resolution possessed a paper trail. Every paper trail appeared valid in isolation. Collectively, they constructed a pipeline. Banking ledgers revealed the serene efficiency of the fiscal tier. Transactions designated as advisory fees, security evaluations, and neighborhood alliances transferred at exact intervals. One ledger received $32,000 monthly for nearly 2 years. Registered to a police captain who had quietly redeployed patrol squads away from a critical supply zone. Another account enlisted $11,500 linked to a land use ruling that converted a closed warehouse into a repacking center. Electronic mails were even worse. They were not encrypted or prudent, but stark. The transfer is confirmed without delay, and the route is approved. Money moved within hours. This was administration, not a conspiracy whispered in backstreets. It occurred in sunlit offices behind desks piled with applications and schedules. Contributions poured into departmental funds, while community subsidies appeared just as enforcement pressure evaporated. Silence was compensated. Inquiries were not penalized, they were simply never voiced. As proof proliferated through government structures, hysteria ensued. Office portals were bolted and shredders operated late into the night. Emails disappeared, but digital archives had already been duplicated. Analysts rebuilt timelines minute by minute, observing names that once commanded reverence illuminate investigative diagrams in crimson. Resignations arrived rapidly. Some bureaucrats claimed lack of knowledge while others blamed misinterpretation. A few maintained they were casualties of coincidence. None could clarify why their endorsements matched so flawlessly with cartel logistics. The public reaction was instant and abrasive. Demonstrations assembled outside municipal buildings. Handwritten placards posed questions no representative wished to address. If the law itself is criminal, what justice survives? Inside a holding center, Governor Hassan Abdurrahman remained mute. He did not request representation, nor did he object. He stared ahead as if the edifice he had depended upon had finally crumbled around him. By the conclusion of the week, prosecutors declared indictments against more than 140 subjects. Not all were charged with trafficking. Some faced counts for falsifying logs, accepting illicit payments, or knowingly endorsing fraudulent agreements. None of the allegations were trivial. Every single one reflected a violation of faith. What stunned investigators most was not the quantity of people involved, but how mundane they were. This network did not conceal itself behind firearms or balaclavas. It hid behind desks, stamps, and designations. Once unmasked, it became evident the destruction could not be repaired with the arrests alone. Corruption does not always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a badge and a signature. If responsibility is important to you, press the like button again, as it assists this content in reaching more individuals. The raids concluded, but the state did not revert to normalcy. It was unable to do so. By the time the sun ascended fully over Illinois, the devastation had already extended beyond evidence lockers and court documents. It moved through dialogues, through neighborhoods, and through the quiet awareness that something fundamental had been shattered. This was no longer concerning drugs, currency, or detentions. It was about conviction, and conviction was failing. Government edifices fell quiet, and offices once bustling with standard approvals stood half vacant as staff were suspended pending inquiry. Crisis gatherings superseded scheduled meetings. City council members stepped down within hours, not after addresses or clarifications, but abruptly, as if separation alone might mitigate culpability. A regional financial institution locked its doors after its director was charged, leaving residents unsure where to redeem checks or access deposits. In communities throughout Chicago and beyond, the response was not initially fury, it was incredulity. People gazed at monitors displaying recognizable streets draped in police ribbon, warehouses they had driven past for years, churches where youth once attended weekend sessions, and clinics that had pledged care were now crime scenes. Seniors congregated in recreation halls, watching quietly as news anchors discussed fabricated services and siphoned capital. Funds meant to keep them alive had been redirected to fuel the violence surrounding them. Fear trailed closely behind disbelief. Guardians rerouted their children's paths to school. Small enterprise owners shuttered early. Longtime inhabitants who had survived economic downturns and crime waves confessed they had never experienced this variety of instability. Street crime was frightening, but this was distinct. This originated from above. It implied that protection itself had been infiltrated. Inside detention centers, interviews proceeded without theatrics. Some defendants wept, while some feigned ignorance. One whispered, "I thought everyone knew," while others immediately requested attorneys. The pattern was uniform. Once the apparatus fractured, no one desired to be the final person supporting its weight. Yet amid the disintegration, another reality emerged. The system did not fall silently, it pushed back. Analysts labored through nights reconstructing exchanges line by line. Whistleblowers stepped into the light, some anonymously, others at immense personal hazard. A retired nurse surrendered records she had maintained for years because the invoicing never felt correct. A junior officer reported an envelope placed on his desk instead of accepting it. A bank teller printed transaction logs at midnight with trembling hands because she could no longer pretend she hadn't observed them. Those choices were significant. They became the unseen backbone of the case, proving that corruption had not devoured everyone. They proved that silence, though prevalent, was not total. By the end of the week, evidence vaults were overflowing. The total confiscations exceeded $150 million in intangible assets. The narcotics tally alone was sufficient to intoxicate entire cities. But the figures no longer startled the investigators. What lingered with them were the names. Officials, managers, and community figureheads were people whose influence had once reassured others. In a vacant courtroom downtown, the bench remained burnished and flags stood erect. The chamber appeared unaltered, yet everyone who entered sensed the absence of something vital. Justice had been enacted there for years, while a parallel apparatus operated behind it. The realization landed heavily across the state. Institutions do not collapse in a singular instant. They erode through expediency, silence, and signatures that feel insignificant at the time. What ensued would require years of reforms, trials, and rebuilding confidence brick by brick. But one thing was already manifest. This was not the conclusion of a scandal. It was the commencement of a reckoning. The arrest terminated the operation, but they did not terminate the injury. In the weeks that followed, Illinois did not slide into anarchy, but something far more perilous took hold. Doubt settled in. But trust once cracked does not shatter audibly. It thins. It leaks out of conversations, institutions, and daily rituals until people no longer know where authority genuinely resides. Politically, the repercussions were instant and permanent. Emergency sessions replaced planned governance. Committees were disbanded overnight. Oversight panels, once viewed as ceremonial, were suddenly endowed with genuine authority because the facet of safety had been revealed. Voters insisted on audits rather than speeches. Transparency, long regarded as a rhetorical device, became a prerequisite for survival. But the more profound impact was structural. Policies once rationalized as community defense were reevaluated line by line. Financing channels froze mid-cycle. Programs designed to assist the vulnerable were paused not because they were confirmed criminal, but because no one could guarantee they were legitimate. The people most injured were not those detained, but ordinary residents trapped between reform and stagnation. Nationally, the case transmitted a signal no media briefing could mitigate. Infiltration no longer required border crossings or brute strength. It required patience, credentials, and silence. Political advancement itself had become a potential vector. Federal bureaus quietly modified vetting protocols. Background screenings expanded beyond criminal pasts into financial conduct associations and unexplained accelerations of influence. The price of that realignment was high. Careers terminated without charges and reputations crumbled without trials. The public learned a difficult reality. Removing corruption does not automatically reinstate confidence. It exposes how brittle confidence always was. And yet something else occurred. People spoke up. Clerks reported anomalies they had disregarded for years. Local officials resigned before inquiries reached them. Citizens began attending gatherings they once skipped, not out of fury but vigilance. The system did not heal, but it awakened. That may be the most uncomfortable instruction of all. Corruption does not flourish because of malice alone. It flourishes because of convenience, because questioning feels rude, because signatures feel minor, and because silence feels secure until it isn't. This narrative did not commence with a cartel. It commenced with trust surrendered without accountability. And it does not conclude with convictions. It concludes with a decision. Whether people remain passive once the headlines vanish is the question. If this investigation made you question how power genuinely functions, press the like button so this story extends beyond algorithms. If you believe accountability must exist before trust can return, share this video. And if you wish to comprehend what arrives next, subscribe. Because the true aftermath of corruption isn't what collapses in public. It is what quietly alters in private, and that is where history is determined.